when you begin to understand the Akashic records from an energetic point of view, and that the deepest levels of the Akashic records are basically within what I would call divine consciousness, divine knowing, you're talking about connecting beyond this physical plane. And I don't mean just beyond, like you're going into the etheric or the astral, you're going beyond that.
Hi, I'm Swara, and welcome to Akashic Records Unlocked, a summit to spread awareness and share insights about healing in the Akashic Records, to bring a little more happiness, abundance, and maybe even a little magic into our lives. Today, we're super excited to have a very special guest, Cheryl Marlene. Cheryl Marlene is the world authority on the Akashic Records and is a mystic who is unafraid of the tough, the raw, and the real aspects of doing deep work. She conducts Akashic Records readings and teaches students to access the Akashic Records through her signature classic, the Akashic Records Masterclass. In the field of consciousness, she is known as a futurist, innovator, and master teacher who delivers life-changing lessons with warmth and humor. Her exploration takes her to the cutting edge, bringing the future to you today to help prepare you for what you will need tomorrow. Welcome, Cheryl Marlene. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. So we're so grateful that you're here to share with us about your wisdom and experience in the Akashic Records. But first off, will you tell us, what are the Akashic Records? That's the big question. And I'd love to hear a person's explanation.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been my experience. When I say Akashic Records, people are like, what? And so the way I usually explain it to people is to say, if you think about that part of yourself that's eternal, what we call the soul, as it moves through the time and space of the universe, it creates an energetic record. And that energetic record is your Akashic record. So going into the Akashic records is like going into the origin of the energy of your soul and turning around and looking back from that point of view.
Wonderful. And so how does the Akashic Records and accessing the Akashic Records help us?
Well, that's something that is really interesting to me, because I think that especially when well, let me say it this way. I look at the Akashic Records more as a process rather than a thing or an event or something that's someplace. And as a process, what you're doing is you're dealing with it from an energetic point of view. So that when you learn how to open the Akashic Records, there's essentially three things that become part of your growth in that process, because not only is it a spiritual experience, but it's a personal growth and transformation experience. And from my experience in working with people around the world with this, what I found is that the first thing it does is it helps you build a very strong inner sense of personal trust. And within that ability to trust yourself, right? Because in the very beginning, you have to learn how to trust yourself, how to trust the records, how to trust the process that you're using to connect with the records, right? So it's all about trust. And in that trust, you get to a place where you begin to understand that as a process that's energetic and from the soul's point of view, what you're able to do is learn to feel an ability to get to your own truth. And feel confident in that. And so that you're not going out searching the world for the truth that you think that it should be there, and actually being able to find it within yourself. And in doing that, then what you also do is it steps you into a place of really being able to come to terms with yourself about your own personal self-worth. Because as you build trust, as you feel more and more confident in truth, then your ability to feel confident with yourself and how you connect with the rest of the world becomes stronger and stronger. So those three things, trust, truth, and self-worth, are what build the basis of the spiritual practice that I think is intrinsic to working with the Akashic Records.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's just a beautiful process that has an unfolding to it. The trust, truth, and self-worth.
Yes.
And what I love about it is that, it's really about coming back to ourselves, our own inner truth. But with
Yes.
the Akashic Records, this idea of that everything, every choice that we've made is imprinted there. Coming back to ourselves is really our larger selves. Is that correct? Like not just ourselves
Well,
this lifetime.
see, I think that I, I, I don't look at it that way actually,
Okay.
um, because, um, because part of what I have found is that there's a bit of what I would think of as sort of like a glass ceiling. And that glass ceiling is based on the idea of thinking of the Akashic Records as like a book in a library, and that it's a storehouse of information, past, present, and future. And all of those things are an expression of looking at it from a linear point of view, from an idea of what's physical.
Yeah.
And not that it's not true, but that's where you get to the glass ceiling. Because when you begin to understand the Akashic Records from an energetic point of view, and that the deepest levels of the Akashic Records are basically within what I would call divine consciousness, divine knowing, you're talking about connecting beyond this physical plane. And I don't mean just beyond like you're going into the etheric or the astral, you're going beyond that. You're going beyond, if you've done any study of quantum mechanics, you're going beyond the quantum potential, right? Going beyond any idea of physicality. And from that point of view, what you're there in, because now you're in an awareness space that is beyond, or is contained within the infinite and the eternal, it's not about what's imprinted there. It's about how you interact with it in the moment, because in that place, it's about what's in this present moment. And that then also connects you with this sense of, I think of it as a sense of interconnectedness that's not limited by our physicality. And so it goes beyond labels, it goes beyond a lot of what we think is true. And I say that because in my experience over the last 20 some years or whatever of doing all of this, the most magical, the most powerful moments for me have come when I've stepped beyond what I think I know. Because the edge of the Akashic Records is in the unknowable, right? In that place that we know that it exists, but we don't know it, right? It's unnameable. And so when you look at it that way, you're able to step into that place. And that then is why, from that perspective, why trust, truth, and self-worth becomes such a powerful motion of transformation and integration, is because you're stepping into that place that is by definition undefinable.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful.
Mhm.
And I love how it is grounded in this present moment, in this life, in this
Yeah.
body, in this. That is
Yeah.
powerful. Yeah, it's a very empowered place to be.
Well, and the thing is that, I mean, I get why we call this a book in a library, because that's a very easy metaphor to
Very
understand,
easy metaphor. Yeah.
right? And I know that there's a way in which I talk about this, that what I'm talking about actually creates sort of its own metaphor, right? It comes in sort of a different, but um, when we are able to let go of that book in the library thing, what happens is that we're able to begin to really experience this from within the very intrinsic worth of who we are. And that is founded within the truth of who we are, right? Like the truth of who we are isn't something that has to be created, it's there. And so it's about finding it.
Mhm.
And then that allows you to have this be a process, that it's not just something that someone's giving to you and saying, here. It's a process that you're saying, hey, I hear the call there, this is something that I want to engage in, and this is the level at which I want to engage at it.
Mhm. Beautiful. So, can you tell us a little bit more about what happens in an Akashic Records reading? What's that process and what are you engaging with during that process?
So the way I open the Akashic records is that I have a set of agreements that I make with the records that form an ethical framework. That ethical framework says, among other things, is that I may never, I can only open the records for someone who's asked me to do that, and I can't ever offer, right? So I can tell people I do this, but I can't go up to someone on the street and say, hey, I'm going to do this for you. So that then I have a blessing that I use and a visualization. So when I do a reading for someone, first of all, they've asked me. And then the next thing is that I'm using that process and that blessing to open their records, not my records, not someone else's records, their records. And what comes from the records is always based on intention. So the reading itself is based on the questions or the issues that somebody wants to raise, right? So it's not my opinion. It's not me saying this is what your trouble in the world is. It's them asking questions. And then that's what I've learned to do as a reader, is to transmit this, what I receive comes through all the ways that you can have knowing. So it comes through all the five senses. Sometimes it's just a gut thing. Sometimes it's just this wave of a feeling that goes across, and I transmit that to the person. I say it as close to verbatim as I can get it. Describing it. If I see things, I'm describing all of that. And then they're receiving that energy and taking it into themselves and deciding for themselves whether that's truthful or not. A lot of people will say in readings that things they receive resonate with them because they were thinking that's the direction, but they weren't trusting themselves, right? So there's a way in which it helps them trust what they already know. There's also then an aspect to it where it's about uncovering that thing that either you haven't been able to look at, or that that's coming from the unknown of your energy and being offered to you to decide whether that's truth for you or not. I've seen it in readings where sometimes I'll say things to people and they're like, that's not true, but this is, right? So sometimes it's really more about providing that flow of energy in such a way that the person within themselves says, this is where I'm at. This is what truth is for me.
Yeah, yeah. And the Akashic Records is such an amazing resource for energy and information. What do you find to be the most healing thing that happens during one of these readings? Most transformative thing?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because when you look at the records as an energetic point of view, you are sending your subconscious awareness into the origin of the soul, and that is outside of what I call physical reality, right? So again, we're beyond any level of physicality in divine knowing. And in that arena of energy is 100% potential. And so it's the basis of the creative energy of the universe, right? And so when you go into the Akashic Records, what you're doing is you're creating an energetic field that concludes you in that field of 100% potential. And you, by definition, are not 100% potential because you're form. You contain potential, but you're not form. But any energy field wants to come into equilibrium. So when you send your awareness into the 100% potential of the Akashic Records, your energy comes into resonance with that 100% potential. And whenever you experience that kind of shift in your energy field, it basically is what we call healing, because it's you going into balance with 100% potential. So that the fundamental effect then of the healing effect of the Akashic Records comes from that equilibrium with 100% potential. And that is true whether it's you accessing your own records or whether you're accessing the records for someone else. right? And then within that aspect, because we're talking about how energy comes into equilibrium, then what we're doing really also is talking about balance. So that within the Akashic records, healing is balance. And the idea from the records is that balance is, it always is. You're never out of balance, but you can be unaware, you can be unconscious of where that balance is. Mm-hmm. So that fundamentally what a reading will do is help you see where the balance is, feel where the balance is, because generally balance is a physically felt somatic experience. Mm-hmm. And so that then anything that's not, basically in resonance with that consciousness, that potential can be released, right? So you can release trauma, you can release hurt and harm, you can release all the various ways that we can all get out of balance, right? Which pretty much that's a big topic. Right? Yeah. Like I could just talk on, I do workshops that are just about this, right? So, right. But I think I just gave you the 10-cent version there.
Right, that's right. And you're right, there are so many, issues and things that people come to the Akashic records with. And, there's typically like 3 or 4 of them, soul purpose, relationships, manifesting abundance, health, things like that. And coming to the records and being in that energy, it sounds to me what you're saying is like, because in the records, there is a natural balance already, that if anything is out of balance or something is like up for us, that has the opportunity to find its own new equilibrium within the space of the Akashic records.
Yeah, I think you put that very well. Yeah, that's exactly what I would agree. And that when you look at it like that, we're all smart, intelligent people, right? And we grow up trying to figure out how to make our lives better. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we tend to do that is put a bunch of labels everywhere. Like I got this problem or I got that problem. Mm-hmm. And not that that's wrong, but the thing about that I found in the records with that is that if you come and you're more focused on the feelings that you have and the frustrations or the angers or whatever that emotion is, it helps you get into it deeper because you're going more into the genesis of it rather than saying, oh, I have this past life problem and it's a contract that I need to get rid of. And it's not that that's not true, but generally there is something underneath that, right? So like if someone has, like they're trying to deal with abundance, well, that's a huge topic, but it's also got a label on it that can make it difficult for people to kind of get beyond it, because the reason why I may have abundance issues isn't necessarily the reason why you have abundance issues. But if we just stick to just calling it that for ourselves, then it's difficult sometimes to be able to get down into those root causes and be able to say, okay, that's what is, if I look at this and take care of this, then what I'm doing is I'm integrating at that balance for myself in that place, and then moving forward in my life in that balance and in that integrated way.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And thank you so much for giving that wonderful insight, which, I think just being human, we want to figure things out. We do put these labels on them just so that we can organize it within our own self. Like, okay, this is how I understand it. But then being in the records and being able to follow the emotion of it. And, they call emotion energy in motion. So it's really, we're talking about the energy of it, energetic of it. And then following that through that gets us closer to the truth, and what's really underneath it is to be on that energetic line.
And that's exactly why I talk about the records from an energetic point of view. Is because it starts helping you connect in those deeper ways that you can't get to if you're only looking at this as, like, say, a source of information. And it's not that it's not a source of information, it's just that there's a lot more there
Yeah.
than, some storehouse or whatever.
Right, right. So in your bio,
Uh-huh.
you were called a futurist and an innovator
Yes.
in this field. Can you tell us more about that?
Um, well, this is the way that I have worked with the records from the beginning,
Yeah.
and started at that in the early part of my career, um, very aware that I was saying things that people actually didn't even believe were true. I mean, I've had plenty of people tell me, "Oh, that's not what the records are,"
Sure. Wow.
and um, and so, I had to come to terms with that, right? Like anything that you do in your life, right? Like you have to come to terms with it. And I came to terms with it by understanding that part of it is that um, I, I at I am at my core a futurist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who is able, in or out of the records, to be willing to step and look and envision the future.
Mm-hmm.
And when I do that within the records, it's not like it's beyond prediction. It's beyond, like that's not the point of it.
Right.
But it's about being able to look at the probabilities of life and feel into the deeper certainties that are buried in that,
Mm-hmm.
rather than saying, whatever, on July 1st, such and such is going to happen. Right. Like that's, to some degree, I think that's meaningless, because especially if part of why I do all of this is to help people, to support people in their process of personal growth and transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's going to get someone down the road is really more my interest. And so looking then into the future from this energetic point of view opens the door to possibility that we don't have any other way.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredibly powerful. What you're saying here. I love it. That's amazing. This
Thank
whole,
you.
yeah, this idea of potential and possibility. It's very big, uh,
Yes.
and it and it
Yes.
and it feels incredibly powerful. A powerful tool that could help us
Uh,
in our lives move
yeah.
forward. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. And and the thing is, Suara, I know it's not for everybody.
yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, that's something I've also been very, very clear about.
Yeah.
Right. Most of the people who show up at my door are people that I would call serious spiritual seekers. And they're wanting to be responsible for their process of personal growth.
Beautiful.
And they're wanting to go as deep as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And so that puts a different perspective on what you do and how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Beautiful. So, tell us more about how you came to this. How did you come to the records and eventually become a reader, healer, and teacher?
I just met someone a while back in my life, like 25 years ago, that worked in the records. I took a workshop, and I didn't expect anything to come of it.
Mm-hmm.
I had another business at the time.
Oh, wow.
But yeah. And I,
Can I ask what business you had?
I ran a garden website.
Oh.
I was one of the very first people to actually even have like because I learned HTML in 1995.
Wow.
Yeah, so back when it was HTMLA. So right, like they didn't even have white backgrounds on the pages at that point. So yeah, so but that's me, right? Like I'm always at the edge of things.
Right.
So when I learned how to do this, I had a very, very, very powerful experience at the workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to walk away from it and I couldn't.
Wow.
And people started asking me for readings, and then the record started insisting I teach. And I struggled with that because that's not who, I mean, like I didn't go to college for that. And it's not in any way, shape, or form what I ever thought my life would be.
Yeah.
So I had to really work around who I am to be able to do this. And of course, then one day after the records said for the nth time or whatever it was, you've got to teach, I said, all right, well, if you want me to teach, you're going to have to tell me how this all works, because it's not a book in a library. And I know that from my experience.
Yeah.
So, and I thought I was stumping them, right? Like I thought, oh, they won't answer this question. And, but they did. And in about 40 minutes, I got this huge, huge, huge download that covers a lot of what we've just talked about, and became the first 90 pages of my first book that I published 11 years ago.
Wow.
So, and so then, like they say, I haven't looked back.
Yeah. Well, we're also grateful that you answered the call and you're working the Akashic Records.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of our listeners have come even here to this space with a certain curiosity and seeking and listening to their own inner calls to come and
Right.
get more
Absolutely.
records. Yeah. And so for you to be here now and be a way shower, that's just wonderful. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you would want our listeners to know about the Akashic Records? Any little, I don't know, advice?
Yeah, I think, I think one of the other things is, and because part of it is that I get this as a question a lot.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is because, the stereotype is the book in the library. People think that the Akashic Records, first of all, is limited to past lives. That's not true. It's about probabilities. The other part of it is that it's what I call other. So in other words, when you learn how to open the records for yourself first, then you can learn how to open the records for other. And when I say other, I mean any flow of energy that's not you, which by definition, of course, means other people, but it also means all other flows of energy. So you can learn how to open the records of, the huge tree in your backyard. You can learn how to open the records of your business. You can learn how to open the records of gemstones, right? I mean, any other flow of records. There is an agreement that you make and a process that you follow to do that. And so it's not just anytime, anywhere. But it also is an incredibly enriching process to learn how to do that. One time I had a client ask me, he was an administrator of a huge healthcare focused network of computers. And the network was across the city in like 20 different buildings.
Wow.
And some of the connections were, wireless, and some of them were wired and whatever, but they were having problems getting information through the network properly. And he couldn't figure it out. He'd done all the things. So he asked me if I could open the records of the network. And with some agreements, I was able to do that. And that was amazing, because the network and different parts of the network actually had different personalities, and there's different energy feelings in all of that. And I asked the network what was going on, and they showed me the place, because I started with the network map, and they showed me the place on the network where the problem was. And the way they showed it to me was they showed me like a gun that shoots balls. But it was big enough that it was watermelons. And they showed me that at one point of the network, they would shoot out the watermelon, and only about every one time out of 10, the other side caught the watermelons. Otherwise, the watermelon came and went splat. And I didn't know what that meant, but I said it to, my client, this is what's happening. And he knew immediately. And it was something that the diagnostics of the network were not meant to ever find.
Wow, that is so
Yeah.
incredible.
So, I mean, so you can, I mean, that's, that's, and I got permission to say this today, but you can extrapolate that then across, other is this just incredibly huge, wonderful thing. And that's why a lot of what I do in the records revolves around research.
Oh, I see.
So, because it's kind of taking that into different areas.
Right. I have heard before that you can have Akashic Records readings for pets and for businesses,
Yep.
for real estate.
Yes.
That was about the limit of, my understanding of what the other was besides ourselves, besides people.
Uh-huh.
So this is really interesting. It goes even beyond that, like even this
Yes.
computer network. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you say that this type of thing, reading for the other, is what has led you down this road to doing more research, what does that mean? What kind of research are you doing?
Um, well, basically what I'm doing, fundamentally what I'm doing is seeing if it's possible to find limits.
Mm,
Right? I mean, because the natural, I mean, you don't have to stop to think very long. If you're saying other flows of energy, where's the limit to that?
yeah.
Um, and so
Is there a limit to that?
yeah, see, that's the thing. And I don't think there is, which is really, I think, one of the foundational ideas about looking at this as energy is that it opens the door because you're opening the door to the infinite and the eternal.
Yeah.
And, then the primary like fulcrum of that is integrity,
Mm,
right? Because I said at the beginning, I don't open the records for someone unless they ask, right?
mhm,
So if I'm opening the records for some flow of energy, it's because I've worked out how I'm asked to do that,
mhm.
right? And so I have a protocol, an ethical protocol that creates the way that you do that.
Yeah.
So that you're maintaining so that anything you do is always maintaining your integrity with the agreements that you've made with the records, right? So just because I want to know what something's about doesn't mean that I go do it,
Right.
right? And it can't just be my higher self to their higher self because that's not ethical. um, and so it's being very clear about that. So the research I do is always within those parameters.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that right up at the beginning about the ethical framework that you work within,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, saying now integrity. So why is this ethical framework and integrity so important? How does that help us do the work within the Akashic Records?
Well, first of all, because there's a different set of agreements when you learn how to open your records, and then there's another set of agreements when you learn how to open the records for other. Both of those, what they do is they make it very clear about when and how you connect with the records, so that it's not just a whim, it's not just a parlor trick, it's not just a game that you play,
Mhm.
right? You're taking this in a very serious way. And so maintaining integrity is a part of that. And then what that does is by keeping those agreements, it creates the sacred space
Mhm.
that's required to be able to connect with the records at the deepest level, right? Like you don't just go dancing into the energy of the soul because, oh, that sounds like a fun thing to do on a Friday night. You do that with an awareness of the implications of what it is that you're doing.
Mhm.
um, and because the reading is always about the intention of the person's or the things records that have been opened, the framework keeps you within the ethics of maintaining that balance and those boundaries and those limitations,
Mhm.
so that um, you're not you're not making it up, basically.
Mhm.
right? And you're not it, and it also, I think another way to say it is that it's what tempers the ego,
Mhm.
because this is a big deal, and and it's one of those places where the power can be abused,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So and it's something I always talk about with people, because I'm clear where my ethics are, but whenever you engage with the Akashic records, however that might be, you need to be aware of where balance is for you and what truth sound, where truth resonates for you. And because it's just as it's up to me to be as clear as I can be as a reader, um, and a connector with the Akashic records. Anybody that I do this with, they are responsible for themselves. I'm not responsible for them.
Mhm.
I'm just responsible for transmitting this within as much integrity as I can. And then they get to choose whether that's truth for them, right? Out of what they know to be true about their lives.
Mhm. Beautiful, powerful. Just, I thank you so much for sharing these insights.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Yes, yes. Um,
Obviously, I could talk about this all day long.
we would love to do that. Um, but actually, we're coming up to the end of our time
Uh-huh.
now.
Okay. Okay.
Before we go, I know that you came today with a very generous free gift. Will you tell us
Yeah.
more about that?
Yeah, what I did is you'll find it on the Summit website to download. But what I did was I created a special book um, for this that's called A New Look at the Akashic Records, and it is a collection of 4 books that I have, and each of the 4 books answers a question. So they start with, what are the Akashic Records? How do the Akashic Records work? What is an Akashic Record reading?
Mhm.
And how do I access the Akashic Records? And so I'm pulling from my various books and blog articles and all of that kind of stuff to be able to answer those questions.
Mhm.
So it does dive down a little bit into the energetic perspective that I have. And it pulls in, it also pulls a little bit from the new book that I have coming out the end of May. So I'm excited for everybody that's attending the summit to be able to get that. And I really appreciate you being able to make that available for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It sounds like an amazing resource for people.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, thank you so much, Cheryl, Marlene, for being here today. We're so
Absolutely.
grateful for you coming here, taking your time, but also sharing so much of your wisdom and insight about the Akashic
Oh,
Records. Thank
well, Sarah, thank you so much for asking me. I'm thrilled. I really, really am. So I look forward to connecting with you and everybody that's watching. So thank you.
And to all of our listeners out there, I hope that you found this interview to be as insightful and just impactful as I have. So many wonderful things that I've learned today. And we're going to continue to unpack the Akashic Records and more of these conversations. So please be sure to visit all of our interviews. And I'll see you on the next interview. See you on the other side.